Greetings, everyone. Before we get started with our final podcast for 2025 of the Powerhouse Perspective, I'd like to take just a few minutes to thank you all for your patronage over 2025. 2025 closes out our second year of the Powerhouse Perspective. And on behalf of Chandler and I, we want to thank you for your continued interest in the podcast and your ability to continue to listen to the lessons and the things that we've learned over the years to hopefully make you better captains as you chart your ships forward into 2026. In 2026, we have some new things that we're thinking about doing, to include having interviews with captains who have gone through both our cohorts as well as other industry leaders. We're also looking at perhaps extending a little further upstream and having podcasts that are more related to those who are emerging captains. We tend to talk about captains who are more seasoned, but we know that we have captains who are just starting their journey, whether that is a part of a larger organization or maybe there's just a solopreneur. And so we want to offer content that also helps those individuals become better captains on their journey to become successful in the area of business. So on behalf of Chandler and I'd like to thank you all for, again, your listening to our podcast, and more importantly, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we will see you in 2026. Enjoy the next episode. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Powerhouse Perspective, empowering leaders for business breakthroughs. If you haven't joined us in the past, I'm Scott Medeiros, the president of Helmwise. This is Chandler Rose, the CEO of the Rosewood Family of Companies. You know, we've been doing the podcast for quite a few months now. Actually, I think it's over a year and a half or so.
Wow.
And we have uncovered a lot of different things. Through the podcast, we've talked about our Helmwise methodology and some of our sea metaphor and our nautical terms that we use. But we also are going out there and applying this. And in applying it, we start coming across things that work well and things that we need to emphasize in different areas in order for people to truly embrace the Helmwise methodology. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the findings that we've uncovered in our interaction with our different clients and through our cohorts. So Chandler, I think you have a little bit of a list of things that you've been at least uncovering or debating with in recent memory.
Yeah, recent weeks, calling it recent business encounters. And
encounters, okay.
I will run those down really in the last month or so. And so just thinking about this podcast, what we want to cover. We've run AI for a while, but AI is the cool new object, obviously, but the basics also pop up. And so I thought maybe some fundamentals, recent business encounters within our organizations that we own. And as Scott said, clients, people that have been through the cohort. So first one is right in Scott's wheelhouse, planning.
Planning, yes.
The importance
or lack
of planning.
Thereof.
Lack thereof. I would say the one we've seen more often is lack of planning for the future or setting triggers to deploy a plan based off of something occurring. And so there's a little bit of, there's the planning to do your day-to-day work, and then there's planning for future growth, future contraction, and what triggers have you put in place to run your organization. So I'll challenge you to a 5-minute description of the difference and what are key points.
Well, when I think about planning, both for the future and current day or operations, they're closely intertwined, because what you need to do is have that longer term view of where you're trying to go, what you're trying to accomplish. Because from that particular destination, you're going to systematically backward plan to get to where you are today. And then you can follow those steps, hopefully making slight adjustments through our OR process, orient, align, and reckon, to your ultimate destination. And in doing that, when you're coming through and you're going through these individual steps, you want to have some sort of early indicator, what we would call a leading indicator, that things may be going off course, that there is a trend that's starting to develop. And getting that information early so you can make the adjustments before it actually impacts your path to your destination is very important. So in the Helmwise methodology, we'll talk about two things: disciplines, which are really the processes that you would follow, your SOPs, your work instructions, how you do actually do the work. And then there's dashboards or measures. So what are those things that we're trying to capture so that we can get an early indication that we may be drifting off course. I use in the Helmwise cohorts a picture of a UH-1N, a Huey helicopter I used to fly in the Marine Corps, of a dash of the instrument panel. And on there was a series of gauges, and on those gauges, there are these little pieces of colored tape. And there's a red, there's a yellow, and there's a green. And I express inside the cohort that when we're flying, we're looking over at those gauges periodically and seeing where the needle is in relation to those colored tapes. If I look over and take a quick glance, even though I'm not looking at the actual number, but if I see that little needle is in the green, then I'm continuing to move on my way. But if I see that needle is starting to get itself in the yellow, I'm going to start putting more attention to it. Maybe I instruct my co-pilot to keep a closer eye on that particular issue. So it allows us that early indicator that says, look, we need to spend a little bit more attention before it gets into the red. We don't want to go to green to red. And a lot of businesses do that. They don't go through yellow. It's either everything's great or everything's on fire. And that is preventable if you do some good planning. And the only way you can do that is start with the future, backward plan, and then incrementally track the progress to make sure you're not getting too far off course.
And if we rank those gauges, so if we're looking at that panel,
yes,
and we consider those triggers, meaning they trigger your attention or trigger further investigation, more detail,
right,
or trigger actions again towards growth or towards, maybe onboarding people or improving processes, things like that.
Yes.
We don't want all the gauges obviously to be in our line of sight because it's too much information.
Correct.
And so give a quick breakdown on how you advise leaders across the core disciplines of business to, narrow down all metrics. I try to distinguish business metrics with KPIs.
KPIs, sure.
Because if you get them all, then you get overload and you make no decisions.
Well, that's also a common trend. You talk to people and they come up with a whole bunch of metrics. They're tracking every little thing. And as you already alluded to, it can be overwhelming. So with using that same sort of what is our goal, you want to come back and find out what are those 3 to 5, no more than 5 key metrics that are going to give you the early indicators that you may in fact be getting off course. And that takes a little bit of thought. You can't just take what seems to be obvious because you are trying to deal with various aspects of the business. It isn't just operations, right? You could say, how are we doing things today? But to your point, what are those early indicators that now is the time to start to grow, start to invest more? And so when you're actually doing that decomposition of the plan, you're also trying to figure out what are that small number. But you're looking for those things that have the greatest leverage to your business, both to let you know that things are going off course, you're getting close to the rocks, or hey, there's some really good blue ocean out there. Let's push up the throttles and try to make some headway in that direction. And most of your business frameworks, whether it's EOS or scaling up or business made simple or get scalable, they all are going to talk about the need to have a scorecard. But what's on the scorecard is the most important part. And it takes some dedicated thought to figure out what those 3 to 5 metrics are. It's easy to take the obvious ones, but if you're not looking holistically, you actually don't have an indicator or a trigger for something that's going to be very important to your business, like people, like culture. Those are all the soft things that we don't tend. We want to measure revenue. We want to measure leads. We want to measure the number of job percentage, those sort of things. But remember, as a business, we have a whole series of things that we must be aware of, not just the true execution, but also the planning and the people.
A recent discussion I think you can help us with when we talk about those yellows are what we call leading indicators versus lagging indicators.
Correct.
And so we, over the past, 10 years or more, have had various times where we have tried to rededicate ourselves towards leading indicators.
Yes.
And inevitably, a large portion of people do not want to go there. They love a lagging indicator because they can prove it's quote unquote accurate.
I was just saying, it's absolute. That's right. It's the scoreboard. We are ahead or behind. It's definite, right? Instead of focusing on, wait a minute, what's the play we're going to run in order to, or what is the trend? What is the momentum? What are the matchups? All the things that could be early indicators that you need to make adjustments in order to affect the score.
You being much more of an operations-minded person than I am, how do you get an operations person who is very tactical to understand and accept, and this is a loaded question because I don't think there's a good answer, but how do you get them to understand and accept a leading indicator is the most important? Spend the time on it, work through it, constantly revisit it, because it is an educated guess. Really, is this leading us towards where we want to go that makes it most likely to succeed? So kind of walk us through that, how you would break that down.
Yeah, the areas that, in the times that I've been more successful, it's never perfect, but I've been more successful in getting operationally minded people to understand the importance of early indicators or leading indicators is in terms of a crisis. Right? If you're firefighting, you use that example and say, okay, you see how painful this is right now, how we're pulling our hair out or all of our hair out? This is preventable. It doesn't have to be this hard. And so how do we get an early indicator that something is going wrong so that we can see the smoke before the fire? And that's the key part. And so for me, I've always used the opportunity when things fall apart as an example how to get better. Now, ideally, we don't want to have a fire to start with. So you can try that, and you can use the importance of leading indicators and lagging indicators. You can talk about all those things, and people will nod their heads in the right direction, but they really don't feel it until something is going wrong. So as a leader, you've got to capitalize on both pieces. Hey, look, this is what we said. Remember we said that we wanted to have this dashboard and track this measure? Remember when we said that we wanted to do this biweekly, and we haven't been doing that? And guess what? Now we're in a fire. Do we like being in a fire? No. Do your people like being in a fire? No. Your client likes being in a fire? No. So, what can we do better? Oh, maybe we should get more discipline in these leading indicators and get the smoke before the fire ability to make things, to fix things before they get worse.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up the Jocko's, Willing's point of discipline equals freedom.
100%.
When you do the disciplines that are most likely to prevent the problems or to create the growth, you get more freedom to do things, you get more time. Right. You also run up against the axiom of the problem of conjecture, which means that we think this is preventing a problem, but if someone challenged you and the problem never occurred, you can't prove, even if it worked, you can't 100%. Prove that's the reason it worked. And so you get into this weird loop, which, brings me to AI, at least for now, is a very giant leading indicator machine for the most part, is where you keep seeing these people say it's not right, it's not right, it's not right. We won't spend a whole podcast explaining what right actually means. Can you get the right answer? But I will say that if you take leading versus lagging and the pursuit of the quote right answer, which we've talked about a few times, how has that kind of entered the discussion on AI and entered the discussion on planning properly, leading and lagging indicators, and is there a right answer?
Yes.
I'll let you jump
Well, and as we talk about leading indicators, it's an indicator. It's not a guarantee, right? It's saying that, look, if we don't take action, we could possibly miss our target because we're going to drift off course. And so for operationally minded people, the important part there is to let people know there is no right answer. It isn't absolute, right? What you're trying to do is, what is the probability of this thing happening or not happening? Which is where we go to AI. AI is not going to give us the perfect answer, but it's a great prediction machine. So it's going to say, look, if you look at this information, it's going to give you some directional guidance towards what you should do. But if you want it to give you the perfect answer, you're going to continue to refine that prompt, wanting the 100% answer. Guess what? Even if you have it, 3 seconds from now, it's going to be different, because as you've always said, you can't step in the same river twice. Conditions are constantly changing. The sea state that we talk about in the Helmwise methodology, those are constantly changing. The currents, the tides, the waves, the weather, all those things are changing. So why in the world are we looking for the perfect answer, right? We want something that can get us very, very close, that we can feel confident in, and then make decisions based off of that. Operationally minded people want a 1 or 0. Over the years, I wanted 1 or 0. And it's not until I worked my way up into the higher levels of an organization, you start to have to accept that there's going to be some gray. because that's where strategy comes from. Strategy isn't perfect. It's just saying, hey, we're trying to look into the distance, looking at the horizon, and we think, yes, if we do this, we can reach that particular point. We'll only know over time when we get closer and closer to it. And usually, we're going to make a little tack to the left, a little tack to the right in order to get to that destination. That's the part that makes business interesting. If it was just a widget, 1 or a 0, guess what? We can get a robot to do it.
Well, in case you think we're preaching at you, we'll move to the next topic of, we talked about planning. So you plan, you do it right. You decide that you want leading at versus lagging.
Right.
You start realizing you don't have the right answer. So you put in plans and you put in processes that are going to make it most likely to succeed. And then here at Rosewood, even we come back and see a opportunity or a problem. And then we look at the tools we actually have and we've already put in place, such as Working Genius, which we've discussed on here before, but is a great tool that you can give a brief description on. And then we look at the situation we're in, even within our own organization, and we go, wow, we had a leading indicator that told us this was a likely problem that we ignored. And so that was in the amber. We knew it was in the amber if we had taken the time, the discipline, to your point, to stick to what we had deployed. And so it's not easy. And so, Scott, give me a quick breakdown of Working Genius, and then we have had this one pop up within our organization and outside of our organization in the last 3 weeks. But
Right.
Give a quick breakdown of Working Genius and the 2 examples, not by name, but just how they played out.
Yeah, sure. So Working Genius is an assessment created by Patrick Lencioni and the Table Group. It's a great assessment. And what it talks about, there are 6 natural geniuses that are necessary to get work done. All of us may be talented in all 6 geniuses, but there's usually 2 geniuses that are our natural God-given talent. And if we do those types of things, we can get energy from it all day long. It just fuels us. And then there are things, usually 2 geniuses out of the 6, that we call our working frustrations. And those things drain us. Again, we may be talented in them, but if we had to do that every single day, it would just burn us out. It would just sucks the life out of us. And in between those, we have 2 things called working competencies, which says, yes, we get a little bit of joy from it and it frustrates a little bit, but we don't like being in the fence. We much rather be either working in our geniuses or avoiding working our frustrations. And the 6 types of Working Genius, real quick, starting at the top, are wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And if you look at those and you break them into 2s, the first 2, wonder and invention, are what's necessary for ideation. That's how you come up with ideas and how you come up with solutions. You need that piece. Otherwise, what are you doing? Right? The middle 2, discernment and galvanizing, are called activation, because that is actually what translates the bigger vision into something people can actually execute. That takes the decision on, is this the right direction to go? And more importantly, can I get people excited about going on this journey, which is where galvanizing comes in. The final 2 are enablement and tenacity. That's all about implementation, getting stuff done. People putting their hands up saying, I want to go on this journey, and people then hauling the supplies onto the ship and actually, trimming the sails to get us to the destination. So you need all 3 of those, or all 3 of those pieces, the ideation, the activation, and the implementation. And so when we looked at Working Genius and we did them for the Rosewood Family of Companies, all of us have different geniuses. What we discovered, even with our Rosewood executive team, is we had a lot of ideation that was happening. A lot of people who had invention. We had people who had good discernment, so that was real good. But we didn't have a lot of tenacity. And so sometimes we would get into this loop of strategy and never actually get anything done, never push things across the finish line. And then also, when we look across our operating companies, we started looking at who is leading our companies. And what we found by looking at the Working Genius results is that in one of our operating companies, the 3 key leaders of the company all had the same geniuses. And so like attracts like, right? They all thought the same way. They all were focusing on the same stuff. And because of that, they weren't looking at their frustrations. Therefore, things weren't getting done. And we could have seen that leading indicator if we looked at the Working Genius side by side and say, woo, wait a minute, we've got to get some tenacity in here. We've got to get some enablement in here. Otherwise, this team isn't going to get through execution. They're just going to stay up there in the ideation or the activation things. And so that was an area that was a leading indicator. It showed us potentially, if we put this team together, what the potential result was, but we didn't look at the gauge.
And we didn't use the discipline that you spoke of and Jocko speaks about. And so the second example, we hit both bookends. So we had a organization that did not have wonderment and invention.
Correct.
So they weren't coming up with ideas, and we were getting frustrated of, why don't you come up with solutions? Why are solutions not coming out of this group?
Right.
And within
why aren't you solving these problems?
Yeah, within the same week, a different organization we were working with, other end, execution. So what Scott described is the great ideas, great discernment, here's know what to do, have the things to do, and not doing them.
Not doing them.
And so, we needed to exercise our own discipline within our Rosewood organization. And I'll just share that because you can put all these things in place. You can get your mindset right. You can get the framework right. If you lose the discipline, you still end up, which we all do, we're still going to fall off of our discipline. But, you end up in a situation, you look around and go, well, we actually had the pieces of the puzzle to know it was in the yellow because we were entering an area where they had weakness. And instead, we waited until it caused potential problems or frustration as opposed to mitigating, which is taking action when it hits the yellow. So,
yeah, in that same sort of situation where you have a tool to guide you, but we get distracted and don't use it, would be the VTO from EOS, the Vision Traction Organizer, right? So you've spent some time thinking about the future, and you've laid out your 10-year or 5-year plan.
This is the season for most people now. So
yes,
this is planning season.
Exactly right. So you would think to the future, and you would figure out that 10-year or 5-year plan, and then you would get that 3-year picture, and then you'd get the 1-year plan is really what you would get. And then from there, you're like, okay, if we want to accomplish the 1-year plan, what are the things we got to accomplish in the next 90 days? They would call those rocks. And so you've got this great 2-page thing that has your strategy on it, and really your execution for the next year has been laid out for you. And we do all that activity, and we brief it in the beginning of the year, and then no one looks at it.
Well, we know what we do. We take it and put it on the bookshelf.
Yeah, it goes over. Yeah, it goes
put
over
it right
there.
Up there, and we're done.
And then you wonder, maybe if you're smart, you pull it out at least once a quarter, but often it's not until later in the plan that you look at it going, wait a minute, we're not going to accomplish any of these 1-year things because the day-to-day has distracted us.
Correct.
And so using a VTO or using Working Genius, again, these are tools that are available to us that if we've got the discipline, and that's the key part, the discipline to do it would help us keep out of dangerous waters. But I also think that this is where Working Genius in the diversity of the team is important, right? If you surround yourself with a team and everyone's interested in ideation, then no one's asking, hey, how are we actually going to get that done? And so you need that diversity thought and an environment where people feel comfortable to say, wait a minute, Chandler, I hear what you're saying, but can we really do that? We've got all these other things going on. What are we going to stop doing? You've got to have that good conversation, that good dialogue. And I think sometimes we just get distracted and we don't use the very tools that are in front of us.
Well, and I think that when you get to self-reflection, so do we have the skill sets ourselves and others with the team? So you want diversity of thought and you want inclusion, and I can get on my soapbox of how we've taken 2 very positive attributes and turned them political. But from a realistic running an organization well, especially when you're charting a path through a new area or new things are coming into business, such as AI, or you're having growth or you're having contraction, you're in this new kind of area you're not executing day to day. Self-reflection, which requires humility, and then gratitude. So why would someone offer, so the humility to ask other people onto the team.
Yes.
The gratitude when they do participate. So you get that diversity of thought. Being willing to include, when we talk about inclusion in I think the proper sense, go out and ask the people in the field, ask the people who are on the grounds, your clients, your employees, your other leaders. You express gratitude to make them want to be involved, and are you grateful for the challenge and the opportunity in front? So talk about how humility with AI and with any change, really change management, which is really, to me, fluctuation of business. There's major changes, and then there's minor, but there's always change occurring, as Scott brought up, of stepping in the same river twice. Humility and gratitude. So we talk about it a lot, but how do you see it more recently in some of these recent business encounters?
Yeah, I've seen it different ways. In fact, I think it was just yesterday at our Tuesday morning meeting with the Rosewood Family of Companies, I mentioned that the two things I've come across most frequently in all the business books that I've read, the two words are humility and gratitude. Just about every major business author are going to mention that word many times, if not just throughout their work. And I have to say, that must be a red thread then. This humility and gratitude thing must be something to it. And it is part of our Helmwise methodology as well. The humility piece is an interesting one because this is the one that you really have to be self-aware. And Working Genius is a tool towards that, right? Understanding that, my strength isn't in wonder and invention. And I've got to be willing to say, I'm not perfect. I need Chandler's help, or I need someone else's help in this particular regard because it's not my strength. And the willingness to do so, the willingness to say, I'm not good at that. The willingness to say, perhaps right now someone else ought to lead this particular discussion instead of me. Even though positionally I may be the person who's at top of the food chain, so to speak, but are you willing to step back and allow someone else to lead, someone else to contribute? Ask that question of someone else and almost place yourself in a situation where you're not going to be seen as the person with all the answers. You got to be comfortable with that. And I would think a lot of leaders, old school leaders, never did that, never admitted they were wrong. And that's just exactly the opposite of what you should do. You should always have that transparency and that honesty to say, for the benefit of the team, I need some help. Put your hand up.
Well, and I think that in acknowledgement of the success that can occur when you're very dogmatic and disciplined in the old school sense of we're going to do this process every time, to your point, I'm not going to take another. We must be realistic, the setting. And so if there's not major change in the market, there's not major change going on technology-wise for us now with AI, if things are pretty repeatable and pretty stable, you can get away with that pretty effectively. And when you continue to see upheaval, like 2020 to now, I would argue it becomes more and more important to not get ossified as a term, but just think of hardened into how you do things because the environment is changing so fast. If you get hardened into how you do it, you're likely to have, a really bad outcome because the whole environment has changed. And so when we talk about humility, being willing to change and listen, another one I've seen lately, a word that keeps popping up is subjugate. And so that word can have a negative connotation if you look it up. It used to be military can subjugate another empire, or you could subjugate someone under your control. But there's another piece of that which is voluntary.
Yeah.
And I have had several instances, even lately, of, all right, they're humble enough to your point to say, I don't know. So even if I come up with a great strategy and I think I can execute it, I hand it to Scott for obvious reasons. If you followed our podcast very long, I'm not the expert there. The next question is, that's great. That showed humility. Scott comes up with a plan. I don't have to do, frankly, what Scott tells me.
Right.
And so as a leader, are you willing to subjugate yourself to the person that you delegated authority or expertise to? And so I've seen this multiple times recently. Certainly it's a habit of mine, of everyone's, not to want to do it. But am I going to actually listen and be held accountable to Scott? That's a step further than I've seen a lot of people, and I've seen it pop up with owners bringing in outside CEOs. I've seen it pop up with involving your team. So you had a great diversity of thought. We put the right expert in the front of the flight pattern. And they told us to bank left. You said, I don't feel like banking left. I'm banking right.
Yep.
Because I have the authority. And then military obviously has seen this because in war it creates great trouble. And they've actually put rules, regulations, and penalties and major penalties into this because actual command changes. So give me the military answer and then the self-reflection, humility answer, which is very hard to do, of, you know what, I need to be quiet, listen to Scott, and not just listen to Scott. If I tell him, put your plan in place, you're in charge during this time, I need to listen and do what Scott says without causing trouble. And so,
yeah, I've seen it at least in my military career, both ways. You know, we would talk about that the mission is the most important thing, which means, look, if I need to place someone else in charge of my flight or my platoon, because that's going to help us accomplish the objective, that's the right thing to do. But at least in the old Corps, Marine Corps, there was a lot of ego, right? Wait a minute, I'm the captain. I've got the 2 bars on my shoulder, and I'm going to be in charge, et cetera, et cetera. And you are humbled early on when you become a second lieutenant and you make your way to the Fleet Marine Force, because here you are. Yes, you outrank everyone, all the enlisted personnel, right? But they've got years and decades of experience. You would be absolutely silly. It would be stupid to not talk to those individuals, even though by rank you outrank them. And so you learn to at least ask the question, at least humble yourself enough to say, look, I don't know, teach me. And those who have gone that way and have asked for help, almost universally I've seen everyone rally around them. It's the person who wants to hold the line, the person who wants to seem like they're in charge, the person who says, no, I'm the one who's going to be standing here in the spotlight. Those are the ones who have always got themselves in trouble. In aviation, when you're flying especially, you've got people who are, because aircraft are talking to one another, especially in any kind of engagement, and you've got to trust your wingman. You've got to trust your lead if you are the wingman. You've got to trust one another, that if someone says, hey, conflight, break right, you break right. You don't go, well, do you think we should? Because it may be too late after that. And you train a lot in that way. And quite frankly, sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes you get left and right mixed up, and it happens a mid-air collision. We lost quite a few aviators to that. But that's part of the training. And it's a bit easier when the stakes are so high. When it's life or death, then you can kind of figure it out because it means your true livelihood. In business, a bit different, right? What is the true risk, right? Someone gets the glory, someone doesn't get the glory. Maybe we get the deal, maybe we don't get the deal, but it's definitely not life or death. But I believe if you have a good series of values and a good culture like we do here, do the right thing, right? Or we before me, then those say that says I need to subjugate myself, because what's right for the organization is for me to take that step back at this point. It's easier said than done. I think it needs to be modeled by the leader. If you watch the leader subjugate themselves and allow someone else to lead, this is where delegation is so hard, right? Because people don't want to give up control, right? But delegation is the very thing you need in order to scale.
Well, they want just enough of you to get the advice and take back over.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's true. But I think it's something that needs to be demonstrated at the highest levels. And with that, people will see that is the right way to do, the proper way to operate, so that we all can be successful. I think it has a better chance. Like I said, I've seen it both ways in the military. I've been worked with or for, depending on your viewpoint, those who are very rank conscious. And I worked with those who were very team conscious. In an aviation setting, especially flying Hueys, it's you and your crew chiefs. And those crew chiefs have my 6. And so you work much better as a team, much, much better as a team. They know who's in charge. They know what the rank structure is. But when you're in that aircraft, it's all about you making the aircraft safe, keeping everyone safe, and bringing everyone home safely and executing the mission. And that's a lot easier to do.
Yeah, and I think that if you take it, so let's take it out of everybody can see if you bank different directions, you'll crash. But, I believe it's correct that if you have a helicopter, you can't fly. Well, I know it's correct. You can't fly it across the ocean. So there's no helicopter has that kind of range. So you're going to land on a ship. And what happens immediately when you touch down on that ship, even if you outrank the person running that ship?
Oh, they're still the captain of the ship.
They're in charge.
They're in charge, 100%.
Because you need them, and once you land on their vessel, they are the ones in charge.
That's right. And they have the responsibility to keep me safe now.
Yes. And so, it's not quite as life and death, but I'm sure you've seen that. But you hit on one of the reasons. Why would I do that? Why would I do that? And we'll kind of close on this one, is when most of these have occurred recently, and pretty much always, the question is, what is our purpose? What's our mission?
That's right.
And then, do you have a good set of values on how you will pursue that mission? The ends justify the means. I don't care how many books or strategies you read, is the worst idea on the planet, and I'll be happy to defend that whenever. So, mission is important. How you pursue the mission, dying with honor, to me, is much more impressive than winning with shame. I could care less about that. So, that may be controversial. I don't know why, but that's a view of where you've lost we before me, you've lost the group, and ends justify the means. But when we talk planning, we talk about leading indicators versus lagging, not being reactive. We're really talking about is being a good steward. Mm-hmm. Stewardship means you're trying to get something to a future state, which is why we talk about legacy. Do we use the tools? Are we looking for the right answer? Are we getting a diverse set of opinions? Are we being inclusive of other people in organizations who see different facets of business? Are you willing to then subjugate yourself? And at the end of the day, why would you do any of it? You're in charge, Scott. You're CXO here, with the exception of myself, pretty much. You can tell everybody else, no, I want to do it the way I want to do it. And I've earned the right after this many years to do it that way. Why would you not?
Well, actually, it's you hit it right at the end, right? You've earned the right. Well, it's actually the years, the wisdom is what says that is not what I need to do right now. Yeah. There are people who know more about retail service operations or home building or any other things that we're doing inside of Rosewood than I do, right? Yes, I've got a certain set of skill sets and experiences that others don't have, but it's actually this complementary aspect that makes us better. The 1 + 1 = 3 scenario, right? If it's just me and that person, then it's 1 + 1 = 2 at best. Most likely it's going to be 1 + 1 = 1, right? Yeah. That person wants it their way. And, so for me, it's a lot easier. The older I get, the more you understand, because you've made mistakes, because you tried to be the answer person and had all the things, because you didn't involve teams, you didn't ask for their opinions, and therefore there was a rift. And when it was time for someone to have your back, they weren't there. And the first thing you want to do was point at them, when in reality you should point at yourself because you never involved them to start with. The thing that is tying this all together, especially when you talk about planning, which makes some of this easier, is you've got to think of other stuff in advance. We talk about in the Helmwise methodology that the first thing you've got to have is culture. And then you bring the people into the culture. But if you haven't thought about the culture first, which actually is underpinned by your values, everything comes off the rails. So if you're planning, if you're just jumping into executing and you haven't thought about what is our culture, what are our values, how are we going to judge what is right, what is wrong, what the foundational elements of our company are, who we are to the client. If you haven't done that, then it's going to be a mess. But if you have done that, all these other things become easier. Because you go, okay, whatever our values call for. Are we acting in accordance with our values? Is going that particular direction going to get us to our stated why? Right? Is it? Okay, great. If it's not, if it pulls us off, then we know right off the bat, there's our leading indicator. No, that's not good. Right? But if you've never defined that, you can get pulled in any direction.
And once you have that breakdown, so we've made these mistakes in the last, I'd say month. Most of these have been made by myself or members of our organization.
All of us have.
In the last month. The real discussion point should not be, Scott, you did, and Chandler, you did. It's, Scott, you failed to live up to this value, which we had agreed upon, in order to try to reach this goal, which we had agreed upon.
Right.
And it's not a personal attack. It's a failure to live up to how you pursue the why.
Right.
And that sounds like a word game, but it is a very important distinction because one, again, we've talked about it here a couple times in the podcast. One is horizontal. So if I'm throwing rocks at Scott and he's throwing them back at me, that gets personal very quick. Mm-hmm. But if we are having a discussion about, hey, you know what, we didn't actually execute a plan well enough, so we didn't have enough we before me, and we didn't do the right things in order to get us where, Scott? Where we're trying to get in the next quarter, or the next year, or the next 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, whatever your goals are and how you lay them out. The discussion is, do you stick to where we're going? If we need to pivot, we pivot, but how we go about it makes it a much easier, less personal, less emotional discussion. And if you don't do that in all aspects of your life, I would argue, including relationships with friends, spouse, children, what kind of house do I want? What kind of friendship do I want? What kind of family do I want?
Yes.
What are we shooting for? And what do we agree was the right way to treat each other and to pursue what we're shooting for? Then it gets to rock throwing, because then we move into the F words, which I don't like at all, which are fairness and feelings. Yeah. So the two F words that can really get me excited.
You just mentioned something which, again, goes back to have the importance of having culture and values to start with, or defining your why. Because when you're bringing people alongside you as part of your team, what are they committing to? Right? If you can't define that, then how are expectations being set? So when you want to hold the accountability piece, which we all know is difficult, but you said, no, look, we talked about this. This was the journey that you're on, and therefore you're not living up to your commitment to that journey. That's an easier conversation to have. But people like it when there is nothing to get tethered to, and that way they're always right, and they're never wrong, right? So this piece about values, culture, why, it seems so soft, but it's so important. It's the essence of any good ship, any good business. Because that is what you're going to be drawn back to. That is your bedrock. That's when you're getting challenged. That's where you can go in, okay, what did we say we were going to do? Or what did we agree we're going to do? Or what do our values ask us to do? Right? Now, you can come into that same conversation with that same team saying, has the sea state changed, and do we need to reinvestigate that? But then that's, again, starting with the nucleus at the top and then decomposing back down into execution. So many businesses don't do this. They just get into the execution mindset. And that usually comes to what their working genius is, where they're naturally, if you're me, you want to go out and just get it done. I'm not going to sit there and think about the strategy. I don't know, we'll figure it out later. No, that's not the way to do it. So you got to have all geniuses, and more importantly, agree on who you are, where you're going, and then execute. That's my viewpoint.
Very good. I think that's a great place to wrap it for the day.
All right. I appreciate it, Chandler. Good things. So thank you all for joining the Powerhouse Perspective. Please keep checking this particular channel for additional episodes. Have a good day. Cheers.
Take care.